All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our conversation today on regenerative grazing. Super excited to have you all here for this important conversation. I am Megan as part of the team from Food of the North and look forward to having a great discussion with you all today. For those who are new to First Fridays, welcome. This is a monthly event that we at Food of the North put on to discuss important food topics in our community. Our goal is to bring people together to learn new information and ideas about how we can grow and improve our agriculture community. So today's conversation, as I mentioned, is on regenerative grazing. It is actually something that I knew very little about prior to getting involved today, but now here we are, and we've got a great lineup of speakers, and it's going to be an awesome program. So look forward to having this conversation, and I think you'll all know why it's very important after our chat today. A couple of logistics before we do a couple of announcements. So at the bottom of your screen, you are going to see a chat option. So if you click on that, that's a great way to connect with people who are joining today's program live. I've seen some people already introducing themselves and saying hello. So please feel free to do that throughout the program. The second thing you'll see at the bottom is a Q&A option. And so with Q&A, you are able to ask questions of our speakers. So each of our presenters today is going to chat for about 5 minutes. And then at the very end, we're going to have an opportunity to ask questions. So please put those in there as we're going through today's conversation. And you'll also see that there's an option to upvote any questions. So if there's an awesome question and you're like, I definitely want to make sure that gets asked, give it an upvote so we can get to that question. All right, before we dive into our program today, we have a few quick announcements that we're going to run through from partners in our community. And actually, the first one is from us at Food of the North. So, as some of you may know, this week is our 5th birthday of Food of the North. Yay! So we started Food of the North. We were previously called Ugly Food of the North 5 years ago with a mission to educate people on the issue of food waste, mostly in the form of ugly food or imperfect produce. And you can see all the cute little misshapen vegetables on the screen there. Over the last 5 years, we have evolved a lot, and today our mission is to celebrate, connect, and empower our local food community and beyond. And we do that in a variety of different ways. Today, you'll see it in the form of First Fridays at B. Over the past 5 years, we have organized 67 unique events, launched the Little Free Garden Project, and have continued to drive conversation around food waste in our community. All week, we've been sharing memories of the last 5 years on our social media. So if you have a chance to go through, you can peruse through some of those and get caught up on some of the things that have happened over the last 5 years. So yeah, we're excited to have finished 5 years and hopefully 5 more years of a lot of good work and fun to come. We announced this last month, but it's worth sharing again. Over the summer, we did a website redesign. And when I say we, I mean Gia. So Gia, kudos on an awesome job. As we were discussing our website and our mission and the work that we're trying to do, we felt that it was really important that we try to create a space to highlight all the awesome opportunities to engage in local food in the Fargo-Moorhead area. So if you check out foodofthenorth.com, you'll see that we have 3 sections: grow, buy, and get involved. And this is really a one-stop shop to find out where to buy local food, urban agriculture ordinances. So what can you plant in your yard? Can you have animals? Where can you purchase local food? And then different opportunities to volunteer and get more engaged in the food community. So would love to have you check it out and spend a little bit of time perusing that. Also, we know that our First Fridays audience is super engaged in the Fargo food community. So if you have ideas for things that we should have on there that we don't, we would love to hear from you. So shoot us a message and we'll try to get to that as well. All right, so I mentioned that we have some announcements today. And the first one is from the Cass Clay Food Partners. They are our co-hosts in putting on First Fridays at B. And Jenny Mojo, she is a Cass Clay Food Commissioner as well as a Clay County Commissioner. And she is here to give us an update on what has been happening with the Food Commission. So Jenny, if you have a moment and want to unmute yourself and turn your video on and tell us what has been happening with the Food Commission.
Great. Thank you, Megan, and everyone for having me. I figured today I'd sit outside and look out at my pasture since we're talking about regenerative grazing. Super exciting. So the Cass Clay Food Partners is a network of really awesome folks that are committed to addressing food issues in the Fargo, Moorhead, Cass, and Clay County areas. We've been meeting diligently during COVID and trying to provide updates on our Facebook page. So follow Cass Clay Food Partners, if you will, and we'll have some great conversations there. We also will have a meeting this Wednesday. You're welcome to participate. It will be online. There'll be a link from our Facebook page. And we're just addressing lots of different ordinance issues. Right now, we're talking a little bit about cottage food laws and what you can sell from your house in Cass or Clay County, what permitting you may or may not need. We've also talked a lot about the Boulevard Garden piece that's going on in Fargo, and how that's a positive thing for our community. There's a lot of stuff in terms of food access issues that we're working on the network to get information out so people know where they can get food and all sorts of fun stuff. So thanks for including me, Megan. And then too, if you have any questions, reach out to the Cass Clay Food Partners.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Jenny. Yeah, we're really happy to partner with the Cass Clay Food Partners, and they do awesome work on the food policy front in our Fargo-Moorhead area. All right, so for this conversation on regenerative grazing, we are really grateful to have the Longspur Prairie Fund as a partner. Over the years, we have partnered with Longspur on many different initiatives, and we're so grateful for their support as well as their guidance on building today's conversation. So we have Peter Schultz here today with us from the Longspur Prairie Fund to tell us a little bit about what they have going on. So Peter, do you want to unmute yourself and video and share what's going on from the Longspur folks?
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, everybody. I don't want to take up any time because there are real superstars sort of coming in. LPF is a small local nonprofit. We're basically dedicated to the restoration and education revolving around the high plains and wetlands of the Red River Valley. This particular topic today is something that was introduced to me by, I don't know, I guess you could only call him sort of a local superhero. We'll be hearing from him shortly. And in the last year, I have been privileged to learn from this guy about how important this particular set of practices is. I think this is a revolutionary talk that we're going to be hearing today. I think this is a silver bullet in many ways for many of the challenges that we're all interested in. And we are truly honored to be involved in even this limited capacity in bringing this stuff out for everybody. So thanks a lot, Megan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Peter. Your support and your positive comments about this talk today. It's going to be great. All right, so with that, let's dive into our program today, why we're all here, regenerative grazing. So in the world of food and farming, no subject seems to raise more questions or controversy than that of animal agriculture. The factory farming system that dominates our food supply often employs harmful practices that can compromise the well-being of the animals as well as the well-being of the planet. However, what some may not realize is that there are alternatives to this form of livestock production that can actually be beneficial to the planet's health. As people who live in the Northern Prairie, we are surrounded by land that is or once was native grasslands, a habitat that is rich in biodiversity and ideal for naturally grazing cattle. There are many management techniques that farmers use for grazing, and one that is growing in popularity and importance is regenerative grazing. Now, regenerative agriculture, which is a phrase that encompasses regenerative grazing, gets a lot of attention in the world of sustainable farming, but many do not understand what it means or why it matters. And that's why we are super lucky to have three knowledgeable, passionate experts for this conversation today to learn more about what regenerative grazing is and why it matters. Kevin Sedivec is a professor of range science at North Dakota State University and is the interim director of the Central Grasslands Research Extension Center in Streator, North Dakota. Kevin provides statewide leadership in range and natural resources management and researches range nutrition, grazing systems, and rangeland monitoring. Marshall Johnson is the Vice President and Executive Director for Audubon, Dakota, And Audubon Dakota aims to connect with communities across North and South Dakota to demonstrate the importance of protecting and restoring native habitats for our native bird species. Marshall is responsible for all of Audubon's programs, projects, and initiatives in both of the Dakotas. And finally, Deanna and Cody Sand are the owners and ranchers of Sand Ranch Prairie Soul Meats, a ranching operation near Ashley, North Dakota. Since learning about holistic management in 2011, their focus has been on quality of life and low input ranching. Their beef is Audubon certified on bird-friendly land and can be found weekly in Fargo at the Red River Market. We are honored and thrilled to have these three speakers here today. And with that, I will pass it over to Marshall to kick off today's conversation. Marshall?
Thank you, Megan. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about a topic that I am very passionate about and our team is very passionate about. I tell people all the time, for the last 12 years, I've worked for the National Audubon Society. And for the last 12 years, I've gotten a chance to do what I am tremendously passionate about. And so I feel blessed to wake up every morning and be able to do this work. And now because of COVID, I just have to walk a couple steps from my bedroom to do it. So that's great. And I get to, a big reason why I'm blessed, I get to work with amazing conservation professionals at Audubon Dakota. And they are every bit the reason that we have the success that we've had. In many ways, prairie and grassland bird conservation for me, I discovered it or came to it, or I should say came back to it in college. I studied business, not biology. And it was on kind of a whim trip with some friends we were in this 18x4 box or makeshift trailer looking out at prairie chickens and the prairie chicken blinds here about an hour where I went to school. And it was then that something that was deep inside of me from my childhood. I grew up in kind of Dallas, Texas and Los Angeles. And so that childhood introduced me to the big blue Pacific Ocean, the mountain ranges, the Cascades, the San Gabriels, and the eastern forests of Texas. But for me, the landscape that always stirred my soul were the prairies. And the grassland birds of the prairies, the songbirds, they're our troubadours, our songstresses of the sky. And something about that was latent in me for a long time. And I was reintroduced to it in that prairie chicken blind, and have since dedicated my life to preserving grassland birds. And grassland birds are, for Audubon, the lens through which we view our work has always been birds, obviously. And grassland birds are, there's nothing short of an environmental calamity happening with respect to grassland birds. They're declining more than any bird species in the world. Over the last 40 years alone, we've lost 53% of our grassland birds. And the reason is we're losing grasslands. We're losing pasture land, which was once our most ubiquitous native ecosystem here in North America. And so obviously that's a huge issue for anyone who cares about native environments and our broader ecosystem. And grassland birds, like most birds, are incredible indicators of overall environmental health. I was asked, are grassland birds a sort of prophet for the environment? And my answer to that question was no. They're incredible prescient historians and journalists. They can't necessarily tell you what's going to happen, but you can believe them and take it to the bank when they are calling out with their silence, telling us what's happening today. And what's happening today is a collapse of our grassland bird populations. And what that means is a sort of cascading effect for pollinator species. Here in the Red River Valley, we've seen that kind of close up, a snapshot of what happens every day to our pollinators like monarch butterflies. And we are aware of that so many of our river systems now are designated as polluted and harmful. And that a big part of that is the loss of grasslands, which naturally take in water, store water, filtrate water. Grasslands also store carbon, billions of tons of carbon out of the atmosphere. When you take the amount of grasslands lost just between 2008 and 2014 here in the Northern Great Plains alone, it's the amount of 670 million cars emissions. So grasslands, being our native ecosystem, is really it's important that we protect grasslands for a whole variety of reasons. And for me and for Audubon, it's really simple: no cows, no grass, no birds. And that's why we sort of reached for the third rail, if you will, 5 years ago, and came to the realization all the things that we were doing in grassland conservation were meaningful, great, but they weren't fitting the bill. And one of the essence of what we've done through the Conservation Ranching Initiative is put the power in ranchers and put the power in you, people like you all, to make a difference with the one superpower that we all have, and it's our choice. And when you buy a product, when you spend $1, you're casting a vote for the environment and the world that you want to see. And so we wanted to create a certification program that set a high bar for ecosystem management. And you'll hear a lot about this technique and approach from Cody and Deanna, who are enrolled in the program and are an exemplary example of regenerative grazing. It really takes a set of practices that use cattle as a tool to regenerate and revitalize grasslands. And Peter was referencing a superstar. I'm going to turn it over to a superstar here, Dr. Kevin Sedivec with North Dakota State University, and he's going to share a little bit more about the science behind regenerative agriculture.
Well, thanks, Marshall, and I thank the organizers for inviting me to this workshop and this webinar. And it's an opportunity that you don't get a lot to do to visit with people that oftentimes we don't see. We do a lot of education for our ranchers and producers, and so there's opportunities. I do appreciate the time to be here and to be on this panel. It's a great panel to have today. You know, my goal today is to come up with one final outcome, and I'd like to see you all, when I get done, to understand that livestock grazing is good. Grazing is good. It's management or poor management that leads to bad decisions and leads to this negative effect that we see from the livestock side of it. And so the idea of regenerative agriculture, regenerative grazing, is a strategy that we can incorporate on our grasslands that really allows us to provide livestock in an open pasture setting, creates a beneficial impact and biology to these soils and plants and wildlife. And so the idea of grazing strategies that look at regenerative grazing is a tool we can use to not only produce beef on our grasslands, but also provide better habitat for many of our species. And Marshall talked about this value of our grasslands, and for not only birds and pollinators and birds, we need to understand that we lose grasslands every year. The World Wildlife Federation has shown in the reports the last couple of years that about 5% of our grasslands is lost either to crop development or urban development. And this loss is an impact that affects not only the birds and the bees and the butterflies, but it affects our carbon cycle and affects our actually nutrient flow that occurs across our planet. And so grazing is a value. Livestock grazing provides value to these grasslands that creates not only an income for producers, but also keeps that grass in grasslands for the birds and for the bees and for the butterflies. And so it becomes important to understand that. But it also becomes important to understand that grazing is good. And when I say grazing is good, if we do not graze grasslands, they actually lose vigor. They lose the production potential that we can see from those grasslands that create a diverse landscape. no grazing actually leads to a dominance of 1 to 2 species. No matter where you're at in North Dakota, where you're at in Minnesota, where you're at in the country, lack of grazing will enhance certain plant species, and we lose diversity. Diversity is critical for expanding our pollinators and our birds. So we want to see a diverse landscape across there. And regenerative grazing is a tool we can use today to enhance that diversity across the landscape. And what grazing really is a disturbance. It's a disturbance that's allowed to create this plant community that can shift and change and create heterogeneity across the landscape. So in simplicities, you know, I talk about opportunities for regenerative grazing, and probably the most common practice we see today is just rotational grazing using multiple pastures. That allows producers to put cattle into one pasture. You basically create a stock density impact on that grasslands, and you get rest on the pastures in front. You then move those cattle out of that, or sheep or whatever you're grazing, out of that cell, and it creates recovery. When you graze a grass, it's like you're taking away carbon from the surface, so those plants have to respond, and you get an imbalance of carbon to nitrogen across that landscape, and it has to produce more carbon when you consume it. This creates your roots are really actively growing. They get this interaction with the microbial population, and you create new shoots or new carbon. The healthier the plant community, the more carbon is produced and more carbon is consumed or sequestered. So it's important to realize in the end that a healthy grasslands creates a healthy system that functions. We talk about global warming, or we talk about greenhouse effects or methane. A healthy grass community can consume almost as much methane as it produces, just through the conversion of methane to carbon dioxide and the consumption. So if we lead today, it's looking at livestock grazing as a tool. It's a way to keep grasslands in grasslands. It's a way to provide a protein source for food source for human consumption. And it's also a way to cycle these nutrients that you'll see from the air to the ground and create this diverse landscape across there. So hopefully when we get done today, that you understand where I'm coming from on livestock grazing is good, and that we can really go from there on the production side. And so I want to turn it over to Deanna Sand to talk about, as a livestock producer, how they use these operations or how these strategies in terms of regenerative ag. So Deanna, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kevin. So we're a 3rd generation ranch, and within the next year, we're hoping to be a 4th generation ranch, as our daughter and her boyfriend are moving back home. Hopefully there. So how we ranch and what we do isn't really simply defined. Cody and I have ranched here for about 20 years. My parents and grandparents farmed and ranched on this same property. And in 2011, after we were having some financial struggles, we learned about holistic management, and we changed the way that we manage our land. We went from a conventional model to a holistic model. When we were more conventional, we calved our cows out in March and April. We fed them all winter long. We put up hay all summer. When we changed to holistic, what that meant was we really focused on the natural systems and working with nature. We stopped relying on outside inputs and assistance from outside decision makers. We say we fired they, meaning we had to observe and not rely on the feed salesman, the vet, the banker to tell us what to do and when to do it. And it was super scary, but really freeing in the long run. In working with nature, we now calve our cows in June when the deer are having their babies. This was the single best change of quality of life for ourselves and for our cattle. The calves are born when the weather is warm. They're born out on grass. And by doing that, we've eliminated our need for antibiotics. We just don't get sick livestock anymore, just working with nature. And we also are less stressed. We don't need to be out there all winter long checking everything. They would need a lot less assistance. So at the same time, when we changed to holistic management, we also began a more intensive grazing management, the more regenerative grazing. We have amazing intact native grasslands on our ranch, which just means they've never been plowed under. Native grasslands are super diverse. They have different root systems. They have a lot of different plants to them. They're super valuable because they just don't have a need to be replanted. And with our cattle grazing holistically or regeneratively, we actually even increase our plant species. We also have tame grass on our land, which is old farm ground that's been reestablished into grass. The primary change we made when we started changing our grazing was to increase the number of cattle in a single group and move them more often, kind of like what Kevin was talking about. We sectioned our ranch off to make 65 permanent pastures. So by doing this, we're doing what we can to mimic the way the vast herds of bison used to graze in this area. We graze an area or a pasture and then move the cattle onto the next paddock. So in utilizing this type of grazing, the majority of paddocks or pastures on our ranch are resting. Those paddocks have plants that are growing stems and leaves. They're pulling carbon out of the air. They're growing roots to help increase our rainfall infiltration. And after cattle are moved out of a paddock, we want those plants to rest and recover and really express themselves. So as they're regrowing, they're providing a canopy over the soil. They're keeping it cooler, which helps the soil biology and all over soil health. So this also offers protective cover for nesting birds and food for other wildlife when our cattle aren't in there. Some areas on our ranch get up to an entire year of rest and recovery. So when our cattle are grazing, they're really an important part of the ecosystem. They're adding natural fertilizer, dung and urine. Their hooves are impacting the soil, leaving little areas where water can pool, even opening soil in places that might have been crusted over. When cattle bite a plant, there's also a symbiotic relationship that tells the plant to add roots and regrow. So, and as cattle walk, they're grazing and trampling some plants. So this becomes organic matter on the surface of the soil, and it'll eventually break down and build even more soil. And it also provides an armor over the top to prevent evaporation. So after 10 years or so of grazing management this way, we have healthy, resilient soil, healthy plants, and we use no chemicals on our land or our cattle. Nature's pretty amazing if we can just get out of the way. And as my friend told me about how we ranch, he said there's more to learn from the process of nature than the process of man, which I found really interesting. So all our management had provided healthy livestock, but we were still selling our cattle at a local sale barn. From there, we knew the next stop was a feedlot, and that didn't really align with what we were doing on our ranch. So we began direct marketing our home-raised, grass-fed, grass-finished beef. We named our business Prairie Soul Meats by Sand Ranch, and the name was inspired by a quote I heard. I'm not sure who to credit, but it says, "Anyone can love the mountains, but it takes a soul to love the prairies." And I have always loved the prairies. I grew up walking on these prairies with my grandma, and they're definitely in my soul. So selling our beef, we've learned a lot about our food system. We have a passion to provide healthy, delicious, nutritious beef to as many people as we can. And we're honored when someone who wasn't able to eat beef any longer can eat our beef with no ill effects. We absolutely love that our ranch can now be full circle and support the grassland ecosystem. Our cattle are a huge part of that. And as another friend says, they have a really great life and one bad day. So since changing our management to a more regenerative system, we naturally have a thriving ecosystem. And that is not, well, it's all because of our management, but it was already there. We've worked with several groups and organizations and agencies. It's not something we ever thought that we would be doing when we were just conventionally ranching. As Cody so eloquently always says, we didn't give two shits about a duck or a bird when we were going broke. So a byproduct of our holistic management is just conservation of natural resources. Our management aligns with what conservation groups are looking for and want to promote and protect. We've been lucky enough to host tours for local, regional, and national groups. Cody and I are both mentors for and part of the North Dakota Grazing Lands Coalition. We've said yes to studies on our ranch. There's currently NDSU is doing a pollinator study. Blue Dasher Farms is studying dung beetles and vegetation. We have local FFA range judging kids coming next week to practice identifying native grassland plants. We've been approached about a possible carbon study, which would be really fun. Some other groups we've gotten to work with include National Wildlife Federation, Ducks Unlimited, Pheasants Forever, North Dakota Natural Resource Trust, and of course Audubon. And we're always happy to share our ranch and show folks a grassland ecosystem that's intact and alive with pollinators and diversity, wildlife, birds, insects. And the reason all of that exists together is not in spite of the cattle, but really because of them and the way that they're managed. It really just all works together. So thank you for having us. And now it sounds like we'll go into the Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deanna, Kevin, Marshall. That was absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to ask all of our speakers to turn your videos back on and unmute yourselves right now. And just give me 1 second here while I change over our screens real quick. So this is our Q&A portion of the program. So as I mentioned, this is our chance where we get to ask questions of these awesome speakers and find out a little bit more. We know that they only just gave us a glimpse of the knowledge that they have to share. So again, there is a Q&A chat function at the bottom of your screen. So please feel free to pop a question in there. And I'll kick us off with a question to, I'll start with Kevin and then open it up to Deanna and Marshall as well. So Kevin, you alluded to the fact that there's a lot of people that think that there really isn't a place for animal agriculture and that the cattle are inherently bad. So we know that there are challenges in changing that public perception, but how do we move beyond that to get people to really understand that cattle are a part of this whole holistic management approach?
You know, there's always been this issue that you can go back 30, 40, 50 years that grazing is bad. And it comes across a lot from the impacts on wildlife. And it's this conception that cattle were bad. In reality, the problem wasn't the cattle or sheep, whatever you're talking, it was the management strategies that were implemented. And poor management leads to poor grasslands. And if you look at the globe as a whole, 44% of our land is grasslands. And mismanagement in terms of overgrazing has been the long-term negative impact. And so for us to put in grazing strategies with regenerative grazing is a tool that we can get across that shows grazing is actually good. If we don't have grazing on our grasslands are converted to something else that loses its value for biodiversity, for birds and bees and butterflies. And so it's important to understand that grazing, if we have grazing, we have grasslands. We can manage our livestock to provide better habitat, better conservation, better soil health. We know how to do that today. So it's our job to promote that activity of proper management to show the value of those livestock. And livestock are a great source of protein that we really need in our global environment.
Fantastic. Marshall, do you have, or Deanna, do you have thoughts to add on that comment?
The only thing I would add is just the nuance around, livestock are not bad, as Kevin alluded to. It's really about bad management, and bad management can come in the form of utilizing livestock in a way that's detrimental to the landscape, but it can also come in the form of destroying or erasing the ecosystem from the landscape. And I think we have to put that in its proper context. So nuance, I think, is important. And I work for an organization that for years, we trumpeted that same notion that maybe livestock management was hurting the ecosystem. But I think science and time, has allowed us to understand that nuance, that it's not the cow, it's the how. And I think that's important for folks to keep in mind.
I like that. It's not the cow, it's the how. Deanna, Cody, do you have any feedback to add on that?
Well, from a rancher's perspective, and I think human beings, we've always been kind of maybe taught or brought to learn through since we were kids, it's all about self-interest and how we can provide for ourselves. And when we were conventionally ranching, we didn't really know about the ecosystems and how it could actually benefit us. So we were pretty much mining our land for our own self-interest. And you can do that maybe for a couple generations, but pretty soon you have everything mined out of your soil. And then it's hard to keep that going. And what we didn't realize and what we were learning now is we had to get out of our own way, maybe check our egos a little bit, and we have to actually learn from nature instead of destroying nature. And then, well, it helps us all the time, every way, and in so many different ways that we can't even explain and probably don't even know. So that's been huge learning stuff for us.
Mhm. Awesome. This question comes from Hannah Olson to Deanna and Cody. What was the final straw that drove your ranch to implement the holistic and regenerative changes you did? Bradley stated, was it a difficult choice to switch from conventional?
The one story that always comes up. We had a financial meeting at the end of one year, and we had a huge amount of carryover bills. And we sat with our financial analyst, and what he said was, you need to borrow more money next year. I was working at the place, driving an hour back and forth from work. He was building saddles. We only had the cattle that we had, and borrowing more money wasn't going to get us anywhere. And then we happened to just hear about a holistic management class. And for us, I mean, that was the catalyst we needed. It's like, we can't keep borrowing more money when we're not making any more to pay that back. You know, obviously that doesn't work for anybody. So for us, the holistic management was just, when we took the class, it was just like, oh my gosh, I didn't know we could cabin in the summer. I didn't know we didn't have to do this and that. And so I'm married to somebody who's very all or nothing. So we were all in on the holistic management instantly.
Okay. So kind of piggybacking on that, this question is from Clara. What were the biggest challenges you faced in switching to regenerative grazing? And I'll also add, was this something where one year you were conventional and then the next year you were regenerative grazing, or was it a multi-year process?
Well, it's been a multi-year process looking back, but we pretty much switched everything as quickly as we could. One of the biggest challenges was there's support out there, but they're far and few between. Like, the ranches that do what we do are 6 hours away and 8 hours away, and our neighbors don't do what we do. So you just can't call somebody and ask if you have a problem, and you do run into problems, especially when it's new territory. So probably one of the most difficult things in holistic management is when Deanna said we fired we can't call our veterinarian or a feed specialist. We don't even have those people anymore, but they do not make decisions on our ranch anymore. We have to observe and see in our management what we did or did not do to make this thing work or not work. And that's been really tough for me because I was always pretty good with working with my hands and not with my head. So I'm not a very smart person. So that's been the biggest challenge.
And sometimes you don't know what you messed up or did right till a year later, and you have to kind of backtrack and look at that. You know, nature doesn't turn on a dime. So sometimes if you run into an issue, you have to look back at what you did to cause that, because most of it is what we caused or did.
It's always our fault 100% of the time.
Nature knows what it's doing, and if we interfere too much.
Yes.
So you guys do the certified bird friendly program through Audubon, and Clara asks, I guess this question is for Marshall, what are the requirements for becoming having that bird friendly certification?
Yeah, absolutely. When we started this program, we were advised by a lot of different people. And this is sort of, as I alluded to earlier, the third rail of conservation, to put the Audubon name on packages of beef. Can you imagine the resistance we met? And so, but again, when we just led with science, and we thought early on, well, this might be the best way to go about this would be a organic certification. And it's about nuance. I've been on some ranches that are organic, and they're some of the worst places for birds. And so when we look at what birds need, we decided we were also advised, well, let's just focus on the height of grass. Well, that's not necessarily the right approach either, because birds feed on other critters like insects, and if we're not protecting the insect populations and the pollinator populations, then what are birds going to eat? And so we created a framework which focuses on habitat management, forage and feeding, environmental stewardship, and then animal welfare, because we felt like all of those things were important to the enhancement of the ecosystem. And so the Audubon certification, some of the things that are prohibited are use of neonicotinoid pesticides. We know how harmful those are to our pollinator species. No confined feeding. So this is a pasture-raised, grass-fed program. We always encourage and seek a premium for the ranchers that are enrolled in the program. I believe fundamentally what Deanna and Cody are doing should cost more. It's different. It requires more kind of elbow grease. And so we believe that this shouldn't be a question of cost. So the protocols, the heart and soul of the protocols are our habitat management plans. And those are living documents that incorporate those 4 areas: environmental stewardship, habitat management, animal welfare, and forage and feeding into them. And so we try to set a pretty high bar in terms of the management. Cody and Deanna, they were already there, and they're already always looking to do constant improvement. So those are just kind of the big 4 buckets that make up the habitat management plans and protocols for being bird friendly.
Fantastic. How many programs do you have certified in the state of North Dakota?
Oh, in the state of North Dakota, I believe we have about 18 to 20. We've enrolled 100 ranches nationwide and about 2.5 million acres.
So I was particularly struck by some of the comments around carbon sequestration of grasslands and how what a powerful tool that is to pull atmospheric carbon back into the soils. Kevin, you talked a little bit about how the animals grazing and that process of trampling and pushing down the grasslands, that plays a role in that too. So do you get the same carbon sequestration benefits of just grassland that is untouched, or is there an advantage of having those animals grazing that land too that does any additional benefits from the carbon perspective?
Well, the big important thing is that you have to have grasses or plants growing. And so the longer they're growing into the season, the more carbon they're going to sequester. So if you look at a plant, the main goal of every plant is to produce a seed head. That occurs sometime in usually July or August. And then at that point, it reduces its uptake, and it goes through a different process in terms of seed development. With grazing strategies, if you can keep the grasses grazed in recovery, so you got regrowth, you got elongation, that plant is constantly taking up carbon. That plant is constantly exuding into the soil health component. So the really goal of this, and that's true of even on cropland, if you can keep living tissue on cropland longer, keep your grasses growing longer, they will sequester carbon longer through the season. So a healthy plant, healthy growing plant, will always consume and sequester more carbon than a plant that's not. And grazing is a tool you can do to enhance that growth.
And you called that a disturbance. I saw that there was a question also on here about using fires and burning. That's another management tool that folks use to create those disturbances?
No, absolutely. Burning is another tool that is becoming more and more popular throughout the United States, and we see more and more of it coming up in the northern plains. It's a tool you can use to keep that vegetation. You get a disturbance, so plants respond. More flowering plants actually respond following a disturbance. So it really enhances the pollinator population as a whole. And that disturbance with grazing can create this more longer term impact on the plant. But the trick is you still have to have recovery. These plants have to be able to recover and stay healthy. And so that's where the rotation or the regenerative grazing is very beneficial. Whether you have burn or not, the combination creates this impact or disturbance. On cropland, we try to not disturb. With grasslands, we want disturbance, but you got to have recovery so those plants can actually stay healthy.
So I see that there are some that folks have been answering in the chat box, but I will ask this one in case others want to know as well. This one comes from Corey Hamilton to Marshall. Are there native plants to North Dakota that can be planted within the city to help support prairie birds that may be passing through or that decide to settle in the urban area? That question is framed.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, it's a great thing that we can do. Every little bit that we can do for prairies and prairie obligate species of birds and pollinators are a good thing. We created our Urban Woods and Prairies initiative here, and so we've actually planted about 1,000 acres of native prairie here just in Fargo-Moorhead through the creation of about 29 or so urban nature parks. So you can do that at your home as well. If you go to Plants for Bird, it's our website that you can punch in, 58102, your local zip code, and you can find the types of species that are native to this area. And you can go find a local nursery or Prairie Restorations Inc. or Prairie Moon Nursery or different other kinds, or you can harvest it yourself and plant it in your yard or your replace your lawn, and you can create habitat for birds and for insects that are passing through. And again, every little bit really does help.
All right, I'd like to apologize. I think we were a little crackly there during that portion when you were talking, Marshall. So at least on my end now, I think that it's a little bit better. Not sure what was going on there. So apologies to our viewers. So this, it might be yours, Marshall. I think that there might be a little feedback coming on your end. So I think we'll be okay though. This is a question for all. Is consumer education of regenerative grazing the most challenging component of your work? If not, can you expand? So let's start with Deanna and go down. Deanna and Cody, excuse me.
Would you repeat the question again, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the question is, as we've been talking about this, that it's not the cow, it's the how. So this regenerative grazing and getting consumers aware of what this is that a challenge that you're facing on your end, and helping people to better understand what you do and why you do it?
Yeah, it's been a challenge, I guess, to say the least. It just hasn't been around a lot, and it's something that I think has just got lost through society over the last 100 years. And you just wake up one day and everything's different. What we do now is what happened for probably millennia, and we're just finally we're catching up, I guess. And then, but it's not mainstream anymore. So everything you read, hear, been taught, it's just very unconventional, I guess. So I think it's catching hold pretty good though. We find that actually more people in bigger urban areas, it makes sense to them quicker, or they already know about it. In the rural part though, it's a lot tougher where we live. And I don't know why that is. It's just the way people's minds are set, and tradition, and people don't like to change. It's hard for them, it's fearful, and they don't want to go away from the normal.
Yeah. Kevin, do you have thoughts on that? Education on regenerative grazing?
I do think, Sands hit it right. It's change. It's the idea of change, and change can be scary. It's our job to promote these ideas and show why. What I try to do is show the economic value. I mean, like the Sands, you have to be able to make a living in the livestock industry. And so if we can show the benefits of regenerative grazing and the return on your investment in time, it's easier. But like anything else, if you're from North Dakota, you're either German or Norwegian. And Germans are hard to sway. I always say, if I can go to a meeting and if I can get 5% to change, I had a good day. So it's just a function of change. It's our job to teach them and to understand it, and to have a ranch at the Sand Ranch that can demonstrate and show. Producers will change other producers. Me and Marshall, we're supposed to be experts, but we don't get the big change. It's the Sands that will create the change.
And so, Marshall, you kind of use the lens of birds and folks that really care about birds and those habitats for them. Do you find that that's a powerful tool for change, communicating with folks to get more interested in regenerative grazing and supporting farmers or ranchers like the Sands?
Yeah, that's absolutely the tool that we use. It's the tool or the approach that is most natural for us because that's what we've done since our creation more than 117 years ago. And what we're seeing is our members are responding to that. It goes against the grain a bit of what they've traditionally heard about livestock management and the use of livestock. And I get asked all the time, you know, shouldn't we convert or move more to a plant-based diet or replace traditional meats with plant-based meats? And yeah, I'm never here to tell someone who has their reasons for being vegan or vegetarian, you know, they've got to change. But if you're asking from the standpoint of the environment, the best thing we can do for the environment is to produce better food across the board. And in this part of the world, native prairie is what's supposed to be there. And the native prairie that we've got left are grazed by animals and grazed by ranchers. And we should be supporting people like Cody and Deanna and their management. They've done the hard work of stepping up and changing their management. Are we going to use our superpower, our choice, to help incentivize and buoy their efforts? So we use birds to tell that story, and we have a peer-reviewed process for evaluating bird populations on each ranch. And the flat-out truth is birds have a better time on Audubon bird-friendly land than other places. We know that now. And so I would certainly encourage people to do their research and support ranches like the Sand Ranch.
Can I add one thing again? So, and even on our ranch, when we changed over our grazing, we quadrupled the amount of grass we were growing by moving our cattle and managing differently. So it's not just, it's economic, it's everything. I mean, the way that the cattle changed the landscape is huge without doing anything other than changing a little bit of fencing and things, but it was a big economic change for us.
So meaning financially, on our side, when we did the work and made the hard changes, everybody knows land prices are very expensive at this time in our history, I guess. So if we want to expand, we don't have to go compete against our neighbors to buy land or rent land, because essentially we bought another 3 ranches just by changing our management, but we didn't have to actually expand our acreage, which is pretty cool.
Oh, that is amazing. So Kevin, you put out the quote that 44% of land is grassland. Is that North Dakota?
No, that's a global wise. 44% of our globe is actually grasslands. In North Dakota, it's about a third.
About a third of our land is grassland. So from a health biodiversity perspective, do we need to think about converting more land back into grassland, or is it more advantageous to think about those management practices and getting more folks to be managing that land differently, like the Sands are managing their land? Or is it a combination of both?
I mean, I'd love to see a combination of both. I think, you know, management is really the most important tool that you can do today, whether it's on crop ground or on grasslands. You can do even a better job with livestock on crop ground to enhance the biology. If I can convert crop ground back to grass, man, I'm happy. That's a great practice. I'll go for it all day. It comes down to economics, though. Economics will drive that, and policies drive that. And so, you know, between the combination of the two, whatever we're doing, I think livestock play a role in that, whether it's crop or pasture land. And I think it's just management that will drive the success.
Perfect. We've got a couple more questions here to answer. Marshall, Steve wants to know, how do you determine an increase or decrease in bird numbers and species?
Yeah, absolutely. We use the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies IMBCR protocol. And it's considered the Cadillac of grassland bird abundance and density monitoring. So each ranch enrolled in our program, we use that protocol and that process to monitor the birds there. We then went a step further and created what we call the Bird Friendliness Index, which is a proprietary tool of Audubon that takes the ranch that we're monitoring and compares it with nearby ranches. And so then we can really drill down to see if our approach is having a greater or deleterious effect on bird populations there. And so each ranch has a bird friendliness index or score compared to the baseline, which are other ranches. And most of our ranches are trending in the right direction, are already there. And so it's always about constant, continuous improvement. But that's the two-step method, our way that we go about monitoring the bird populations on each ranch that's enrolled.
Fantastic. So we are approaching the end of our time here together today. I feel like we could keep this conversation going for hours. This is so interesting and such rich dialogue. But we always like to conclude every first Friday with a final question for all of our panelists. And that is, what can the folks who are listening here today do to support you, to share this message, to get more people supporting Audubon's program and regenerative grazing practices? So I'll start with the order that we spoke with today. So Marshall, if you want to kick us off.
The number one thing that you can do to support Audubon is to support ranches like the Sand Ranch and Prairie Soul Meats at Red River Market. That's the most important thing you can do.
Fantastic. Kevin, what are your thoughts?
You know, for me, it's the way I started. You know, just understand the value of the livestock grazer that it has on our resources, and so understand grazing isn't bad; it's management that's bad. And so have examples like the Sand Ranch and producers who are doing the right thing in conservation planning to enhance our resources.
Perfect. And then Deanna and Cody.
Well, of course, tomorrow's the only day we aren't going to be at the Red River Market, so come see us next Saturday. But just getting the word out there about, you know, what we do and how it can hopefully economically impact other people too. Obviously, if you want to buy our beef, that would be great. For us, it's a whole bigger system than that. It's just keeping everything happy, keeping quality of life, good cattle, good food, good plants. You know, it's the whole circle.
Absolutely. Well, I feel extremely inspired to go out and buy some Audubon certified bird friendly beef. So I will be there next Saturday at the Red River Market to purchase some, and I hope the other viewers are as well. I just want to say thank you all so much for joining us today. This was such a fascinating conversation and a very important one as well. So thank you. For those who tuned in, thank you so much for joining us. It was awesome to have you here today. The Facebook video should be published shortly, so please share that with your friends and family and followers. Would love to have more people learn more about regenerative grazing and awesome ranchers like the Sands. Our next First Friday is October 2nd. And we are going to be talking about the U.S. food supply chain. We know that there was a lot of disruptions that happened as a result of COVID, and people didn't really understand how this big complex food system works. So we have some awesome people who are going to share a little bit more about that. So mark your calendars for October 2nd. But with that, hope you all have a wonderful Labor Day weekend. Thank you so much for tuning in today, and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.